Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In today's session, we will go beyond the basics of GitHub with a series of scenario-based interview questions. Today we will look at 15 scenario-based interview questions for GitHub. Now these questions are designed to test your problem-solving skills, technical knowledge, and also your practical experience with GitHub. So essentially, hands-on is what will be tested in your interview. Once again, before I start off with this session, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So let's get started with this. The first question I have is you're working on a team project and there are multiple developers who need to collaborate on new features simultaneously. How would you organize branches in the repository to facilitate parallel development and minimize conflicts? So for this, we can adopt a branching strategy like Git flow. So in GitHub, we have different branching strategy. Git flow is one such option. Now under this, we will have separate branches for features, bug fixes, and releases. So essentially, we'll maintain multiple branches. Now each of the developer will create a feature branch for their work from the develop branch and then start working on their feature independently, and once the work is completed, they will submit a pull request for code review and then integration of their changes. Now this approach will allow for parallel development while also maintaining a clear separation of any concerns and version control. So essentially, each of the developer will have their own feature branch, and this feature branch can be created from a develop branch and then start making the changes in the feature branch individually, and then once the changes are ready, create a PR for code review and then merge those changes, and this will allow for parallel development. The next question we have is you have submitted a pull request for review and a team member has requested changes. How would you address their feedback and update the pull request accordingly? So for this, we'll have to basically review the comment and suggestions that are provided by the team member, make the necessary changes to the code, and then push the updates to the same branch using the original pull request. So basically, we can update the pull request telling that we have made the necessary changes. So once the changes are complete, we will be leaving a comment in the pull request conversation indicating that the feedback has been addressed, and then request for a re-review from the same team member. So once we get the comment or the suggestion or the change that needs to be done to the code, we will make those necessary change, push the change to the same branch in the original PR, and then update that PR telling that we have made the necessary changes, and then re-request for the review of the same PR. The next question we have is you're managing a private repository with sensitive code and you need to grant access to external contractors for a limited time. How would you manage repository permissions to ensure security and compliance? So for this, we can create a separate team or a separate group for the external contractors and then grant them with the necessary permissions to the repo. Like for example, giving a read-only access to the repository. Now, once the contract expires or the project is completed, we can remove that group or that team which has the access. So we can revoke their access from the repository, and this will prevent any unauthorized access to your sensitive code. So we can like create a temporary group with the necessary very limited permissions, and once the project completes or the contract expires, simply remove that permissions, and that way we can restrict the access to your sensitive code. The next question we have is you're setting up automated testing for a project using GitHub Actions. How would you configure the workflow to run tests automatically whenever a new commit is pushed to the repository? So for this, we will be creating your GitHub Actions. So whenever we talk about CI/CD in GitHub, we can make use of your GitHub Actions. So we'll create a GitHub Actions workflow file within the repository. So this is essentially the path that we'll have within your GitHub, and then we can define all the necessary steps that we need to follow as part of your automation. So it could be installing the dependencies or running the test and generating the report results. Then we can also configure the workflow to trigger on any push events. All right. Now, these push events can be targeted to the main branch or any specific branch that you want, and this will ensure that the tests are executed automatically whenever there is a new commit to the specified branch. So that way we can automate your GitHub Actions workflow. The next question we have is, you have discovered a security vulnerability in one of the project dependencies. How would you update the dependency to resolve the vulnerability and ensure the project remains secure? So for this, we will need to review the project's dependency manifest file. Now, it could be your package.json or requirements.txt. So wherever you have defined your dependency, we will need to review that file and then identify the vulnerable dependency within that file and the version that is affected. Now, after that, once you have identified it, we will need to update the dependency to the latest version or to any non-vulnerable version, or also apply a security patch that is provided by the package maintainer, and then finally commit those changes to the repository and follow the standard pull request and code review process to update the dependencies into the project. So basically, first identify which dependency is having the vulnerability, update that dependency to the latest version, create a pull request to review those changes, and then merge those changes into your repository. The next question we have is, you're implementing continuous deployment for a web application using GitHub Actions. How would you automate the deployment process to deploy changes to a staging environment for testing and then promote them to production? So for this, we will need to create separate GitHub Actions workflow. So one GitHub action to deploy the changes to the staging environment, and another GitHub Actions workflow to deploy the changes to the production environment. Now, the staging environment would trigger on push events to the main branch and then deploy the changes to the staging environment only for testing. Um, then once the changes are verified, once the testing is successful, the production deployment would be triggered, which will deploy the changes to the production. Now this can be triggered either manually or automatically to promote the changes to the production environment. So basically we'll have two workflows. One workflow will deploy to the staging environment and another workflow will deploy to the production environment. Now first, the staging environment will be deployed where the testing will happen. Once the testing is successful, that's where we can deploy the changes to the production environment. The next question we have is, you're archiving an old repository that is no longer actively maintained. How would you archive the repository to make it read-only and prevent further changes while preserving its historical data? So for this, we will navigate to the settings section within the GitHub, and then we'll have this option called archive this repository and confirm the action. So if you go to your repo that you want to archive, you can go to settings, and if you scroll to the bottom here, you should be able to see this archive this repository. Okay, so you can click on this and then confirm the action. Now when you do that, the archive, the repository will be archived and it will be marked as read only repo, and this will prevent any further push to the repo, creating any pull request or issue creations. All those things will be blocked. We won't be able to do that. While it also maintains the commit history, the branches, and also releases for reference purposes. So that's how you can archive your repository and make it a read-only repository. The next question we have is, you're working on a project that relies on external libraries managed as Git submodules. How would you update the submodules to incorporate changes from their respective repositories into your project? So for this, we can navigate to the project's root directory, and then we can use this command, git submodule update hyphen hyphen remote command. Now this command will fetch and merge the changes from the submodule repo into the project directory. All right. Now this command will ensure that the project's submodules are updated to the latest commits in the respective repos, also incorporating any new features or bug fixes or improvements. So we can simply run this command, which will get the updates from the submodules and apply to our project repository. The next question we have is, you're interested in contributing to an open source project hosted on GitHub. How would you fork the repository, make changes, and submit a pull request to contribute your code back to the project? So for this, we can navigate to the projects repository on GitHub, and we have an option called fork that we can click on. Now, this will create a copy of the project on your GitHub account. So if you navigate to the GitHub repo that you want to contribute to. So let's say, for example, this repo. Here you should be able to see this fork option. Now, for me, this is disabled because I'm the owner. But if you go to this repo, this option will be enabled. When you click on this, a copy of this project will be created in your GitHub account. Now, once you have done that, you can clone the forked repo to your local machine, right? Running the git clone command. Create a new branch for your changes, make the necessary changes, commit those changes to your branch, and then push that branch to your forked repo in your GitHub account. All right. Once that is done, you will be creating a pull request from your branch to the original project repo, describing the changes that you have done and also requesting for review and integration. So that's how you can contribute to any open source project that you want to contribute to. The next question we have is, you're tasked with cleaning up a repository with outdated branches, unused files, and stale pull requests. How would you identify and remove unnecessary clutter to streamline the repository's structure and also improve maintainability? So, for this, we can essentially review the list of branches that you have in the repository and then identify the branches that are no longer needed or needs to be merged into your main branch. So you can go to your GitHub repo, look at the list of branches that you have. So if I go to some other repo, let's say, let me see, if I have any branches here. Okay, so we can review the list of branches and look at the branches that are no longer needed or needs to be merged into your main branch or your develop branch. Then we can delete any obsolete branches that are no longer needed, either by using the GitHub interface or by using the Git commands on your local machine. Additionally, we can review for any open pull requests and close out those pull requests, or any inactive pull requests that are no longer relevant. So go to your pull requests and see if there are any open pull requests or any inactive pull requests that are no longer needed and close them out. Finally, we can review the repository's file structure and remove any unused files or directories. And this will help us to declutter the repo and also improve the navigation. So, go to the repo, see if there are any files that we are no longer using, delete those files, and this will help us to declutter our repo and also help navigate through the repository. The next question we have is, you're creating a project website or documentation site using GitHub Pages. How would you set up the repository and configure GitHub Pages to publish the site automatically from a specific branch or directory? So for this, we can create a new repository on GitHub and initialize it with a readme.md file or any of your documentation content. Now then we can navigate to the repository settings and go to the GitHub Pages section and then select the source branch or your directory containing the site content. So you can go to your repo, go to settings, and you should be able to see the GitHub Pages option. And here you will need to specify your basically the branch, okay, which branch contains your code, basically the documentation code, and that will help you to publish your documentation site or your pages, your GitHub pages. The GitHub pages would automatically publish the site from your selected source whenever there are changes pushed to the repository, and this will provide a seamless and automated way to host any documentation or your project websites. Next question we have is, you're migrating a repository from one GitHub account to another or transferring ownership to a different user or organization. How would you transfer the repository while preserving the commit history, issues, and pull requests? So for this, again, we can navigate to the settings section in the repository, and we should be able to see an option, transfer repository, that will help us to transfer the ownership. Now, we can either transfer the ownership to a desired user or to an organization. So essentially in your GitHub repo, if you go to settings, under the settings, if you scroll down to the bottom, you should be able to see the transfer ownership. You can click on this and you can choose whether you want to transfer this to an organization within your GitHub, or to a different organization or to a different user. All right. Now, if you're transferring the ownership to a different GitHub account, the new owner will need to accept the transfer request. So, once if I'm transferring my GitHub repo to you, you will need to accept that request. Now, once the transfer is complete, the repository's commit history, issues, and pull requests, everything will be preserved. Also, the collaborators would retain their access permission. So, if there are any collaborators that are already working on this repo, that will be preserved, and they would retain their permissions as well. The next question we have is, you're automating a workflow that involves interacting with GitHub repositories programmatically. How would you use the GitHub API to perform actions such as creating issues, commenting on pull requests, or retrieving the repository data? So for this, we can make use of the GitHub API endpoints and the authentication mechanisms, which can be used to authenticate with GitHub and then perform actions. The actions can be creating issues or commenting on the PRs, the pull requests, or fetching the repository data using HTTP requests. Now, depending on the programming language and the environment that you're using, we can make use of the client libraries or SDKs provided by GitHub or any third-party libraries to simplify your API interactions and also handle the authentication and request or response parsing. So basically, we'll have to authenticate. Once authenticated, we can start interacting with GitHub programmatically. The next question we have is, you're maintaining a mirror or fork of a repository across multiple Git hosting platforms, example, GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket. How would you keep the repository synchronized to ensure consistency and availability across platforms? So for this, we can configure automated synchronization between the repositories using Git remotes and hooks. Now, by adding remote references to each of the repository and setting up periodic fetch or push operations or webhooks, changes made in one repo would be propagated to other repositories, and this will ensure we have a consistency and availability of code across platforms. So we can make use of remote references, and also setting up periodic fetch and push operations, or also we can make use of webhooks, so that whenever there's a change, it will automatically pick those changes and update the repositories across all the platforms. The next question we have is, you're responsible for ensuring compliance with regulatory requirements and company policies for repositories containing sensitive data or intellectual property. How would you enforce access controls, audit trials, and data protection measures to meet compliance standards and mitigate risks? So for this, we can implement cross controls and permissions management, which will help us to restrict the access to any of our sensitive repos based on RBAC principle. So RBAC is your role-based access control. So based on the roles, we will be giving the access. Additionally, we can also enable audit logging and monitoring features, which will help us to keep track of any user actions or changes that is being done inside the repo, and this will ensure we have accountability and also transparency within the repository. Finally, we can also enforce data protection measures such as encrypting the repo, tokenizing the repo, and also using data loss prevention policies And these will help us to safeguard the sensitive data and intellectual property from unauthorized access or disclosure. So basically have all the necessary security measures to make sure there's no uh, unauthorized access to the repository, there's no disclosure of the repository, or basically people who should not have access to the repo, they will not have the access. And that brings us to the end of our scenario based GitHub interview questions. I hope you found this video helpful and informative. If you did, please be sure to give a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for more content, and hit the bell icon to get notified of the latest uploads. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.